Hello and welcome back to the lab. Today on the bench I have a pile of TM500 and 5000 pieces of equipment. I'm fielding a lot of questions on this kind of setup in general, as well as both lines from Tektronix, so I figured I'd make a video about it. In this video we're going to talk about some of the differences between the two frames. I do have a 5000 piece of equipment to show, and that hasn't been on the camera yet, so future repairs. And also some of the limitations and some of the things that I've learned to watch out for when purchasing TM500 and 5000 pieces of equipment. To get started, the 500 series was first, the 5000 series followed later, and it was a modular system from Tektronix. So in this power frame that consists of a power frame and then the actual plug-in modules. And depending on the plug-in modules, they can do many different things. For instance, here we have a power supply, a couple of differential amplifiers, very similar to the 7822. We also have a couple of meters. There's a whole bunch of different meters that fit this line. We have a pulse generator over here. All of my scope calibration equipment, that is the more modern equipment, is in the 500 series. I do have some of the old type series in the lab that I use regularly, but a lot of the more modern stuff is the TM500 series. The plugins have a single edge connector in the back. This one's a little bit special because it has this switch right here, which I will talk about here in a little bit. And you can find power bays up from 1 module up to 6 modules. This is actually a 6000 power bay, or a 5006 power bay that's designed for a 19-inch rack enclosure. That's why it's got the ears on it. The 6 bay units, there's both standalone and rack mount. There's also some kind of suitcase style design power supplies like the TM515, which is a 5 bay, kind of looks like luggage from the time period. I'm not a fan of that one because of cooling reasons. But all in all, some of the plugins are pretty powerful and it's a nice system. So to get started, we'll talk about the power frames. So for now, we'll focus on this small 2-bay module. I have this taken apart. This hasn't been plugged in for a while, so it's safe to handle. I have this taken out of its case and everything because this makes a wonderful troubleshooting supply for the TM500 and 500 modules, not 5000 modules. If you look at the front of this module, you'll see this cutout right here. This cutout's important because on that power supply, this cutout interfaces with this push button. So when that button's not pushed, it tells the plug-in that it's a low power bay, and I believe low power means it's up to 400 milliamps or something like that. If this was solid here, this would denote it to be a high power bay, and I could get the full specification out of this power supply. One of the things you'll note is this little LED in this power supply. It has a 400 milliamp max current limit. That's the difference between a high power bay and a low power bay. Now, as this is a 2-bay unit, this is not a high power bay at all. There are no high power bays on this one. There's the marker at the back of the TM506, the high power compartment. Every power supply that's a 4-bay and higher has the high power component or has the high power bay, and it's always on the right. It's a single bay per supply, and it's always the rightmost bay looking at the front. You'll also notice on the difference between the 500 and 5000 series. On the 5000 series, we have this connector right here. This is actually for GPIB. That's one of the core differences between the modules, is most of the 500 series are standalone modules. They're not microprocessor controlled. They're not programmable. On the 5000 series, most of them are microprocessor controlled, GPIB programmable, and things like that. They have a little extra card edge connector for the GPIB. That gets me into one of the main differences between the 500 series and the 5000 series. The literature might say they're incompatible with each other. The 500 plugins can go in a 5000 bay. The 5000 plugins cannot go in a 500 bay. The other main difference between the two power bays is the 5000 series tends to be actively cooled. Now the 5 and 6 bay of the 500 series, you start getting a fan. 4 bays and under in the 500 series, they're passively cooled. The other core difference is in the power supply. In here, we have a nice big chunky transformer. And in the 5000 bay, we have a switching power supply. So the 500 series tends to be a little quieter. Now, sometimes where that comes into effect is for some of the, say, SG505s, the AA501s, things like that, the linear power supply could be a little bit better in terms of noise. And if we're doing ultra-low distortion measurements, that could come into play. The other thing to note when picking up a power supply, any power supply, is every power unit for the 500 and 5000 series has pass elements in the frame. Now the high power bay has some high power transistors, and then they have, actually they're all pretty decent power, but they have some really heat sinked and high power transistors for the high power bay and the 5000 frames. In this particular one, because we don't have a high power port, we have the regular pass elements. You'll see there's one here, that's for this bay, and then we have one here and one here. Yep, one here and one here. That's for this bay. Now what's really important about those pass elements is, depending on the plug-in and depending on how the plugins are used, these transistors are used in various ways. Some of them are voltage regulators, some of them do other functions, some of them aren't even used at all. These also have a tendency to go bad. So when you're first checking in a power frame, always check all of these transistors to make sure they're not toasted, because it's a horrible idea to pop in a plug-in, find out you have bad pass elements, and then damage is done to the plug-in, and very bad things happen. This is my sacrificial plug-in, actually. These power supplies, they're a dime a dozen on the internet, so this particular unit, this is what I test all the bays for before I put any of my more valuable plugins in, say like an SG505 or a 502, something like that, or one of my DMMs. So I test every port with this power supply, to make sure the power port and the power frame are functioning normally before I hook any of the more exotic plugins up. Other than that, it's just the distribution board. On some of the power frames, you have interfaces onto this motherboard that can go to BNCs in the back. This one doesn't because it's so small. You start seeing that on the 3-bay units up to the and up. That's how, say, I'm getting the 10 megahertz reference into my TG501 for the lab, things like that. So depending on how the power slots are wired, that can be double check that before you just throw a whole bunch of plugins in. The other thing is, this series from Tech was sold as complete modular test sets. So you get a bay, a couple of different instruments, and they would actually have interconnecting wiring on the back plane. That also meant the positions were locked. You couldn't just pop them out, move them around. All of my back planes are, there's nothing there. But it is something that you could do in a personal lab, or you should check, especially if you're getting just a naked power frame without plug-ins, just check that there's nothing interconnecting any of the ports together. Not that you feed signal where you're not expecting it and cause some damage to a plug-in. Okay, this cable. This cable is the reason for this power supply. I was using, this is a extension cable for troubleshooting 500 series plugins, and has 2 ends on it. One of the things that's super important to notice is this cable, especially this end, is not keyed like this. These are. Here's the key here. Also, there's 2 ports at the bottom. These are also keys. Those keys prevent you, if this snaps together like this, those keys are a safety interlock to prevent you from doing that. It'll fit. It'll burn up a plug-in. Ask me how I know. That is one of the reasons why I went away from using the extension cable and going to the power supply. The other reason that I had to migrate away from the cable is I only have one of those, and on the AA501s I need 2 power ports. So this became my troubleshooting power supply, which is why it's out of the case, and why I haven't taken the time to put it back in the case. Taking a look at these meters, these are all the same. These are TM502As, and I have quite a few of them. I've gotten a lot of questions and comments on the meter bank that I've created. Actually, I have 2 of these 4-bay plugins that are almost full of meters. This hole is actually going to be filled in short order. I have another 502 coming. These are fantastic, especially this setup. These are fantastic for working on a multi-rail power supply because you can hook up all the meters. They're independent. You just fire up the power supply and then you can watch all the power rails at the same time. Every single one of these meters had issues and needed calibration and repair when I got them. None of them were good as delivered. Everyone. Actually, every one of my plugins needed at least an alignment, if not more extensive repair. A perfect example, if you check back in the video log, the TG501 that I fixed for the gentleman overseas, that was sold as needs minor cleaning and repair. And as that video shows, that needed an extensive restoration. It was nowhere near functioning, but we got that one taken care of. So just be cautious. Know that you might get into it, might get into some, the rabbit hole can be kind of deep. Also, especially with the DMMs, all of them needed an alignment. Actually, this one didn't even align. You'll notice it says DC only, AC no cal. That's because there are some trimmer capacitors that are bad in this one where the AC didn't calibrate, but the DC did. So I'm using it for DC only. I don't do much AC measurements with these anyway, so that was inconsequential for my lab, but I tagged this one just so I know. And I'll be doing the DMM502 restoration when it comes in and getting it up and going. Some of the 502As have a temperature probe on them. Some of them don't. Just a thing with the 502As. The other thing to note that's a little weird with the 502s is they have a 20 megohm input. This kind of leads back into most meters have a 10 megohm input impedance. These have a 20 megohm input impedance. Doesn't load the circuit as well. Doesn't work so well with high voltage probes. Just something to be aware of. If you're curious as to what's out there for plugins, definitely pick up a tech catalog. Look through the catalog. It'll give a lot of specifications. It'll give a bunch of stuff, a bunch of things, and give you an idea of the sheer number of plugins that Tech created for the TM500 and 500 series power frames. It is quite substantial. Everything from power supplies to pulse generators to function counters to function generators to differential amplifiers to calibration suite for up to a 350 megahertz scope. Actually, higher than that, gigahertz scope. Harmonic distortion analyzers, some low distortion oscillators, ultra low distortion oscillators. It runs the gambit. So take a look at a catalog, and that'll give you some idea as to what's out there. One thing to note about these is these displays are starting to die due to age, and they are starting to get hard to source. I had some LCD segments that were out in one of my SG503s. I think I bought the last, at least at the time I purchased it, I bought the last digit in that I could find online. Here are two examples of SG503s, and what you'll notice is they are two different digits. So even in the same plug-in, depending on the era it's from, you can end up with different LCDs and also different drivers in the plug-in itself. That was another place where for that TG501 that I had to do, I needed a driver IC for the digital display. I believe that was the TG503 or the 501, and that was hard to source as well. So if anything's wrong with these displays, I would pass on it and get another unit. It might function, it might work, it could be real tough to get that display working again. This is my FG507, and this is a good example of why the camera actually makes this look bigger than it is. But this is a good example of one of the drawbacks of the 500 series. The front panels of these can get pretty cramped. Actually, let me get the 501 out of here too. Here's the SG501 next to the FG507. You'll notice they're identical. They are the same plug-in. The 507 just adds a sweeping function on the other half. But for being a function generator, it only goes to 2 megahertz, which is meh. I mean, nowadays, that's pretty low bandwidth. One of the nice things about these, though, is they go to some ultra-low speeds. They're not the fastest things, but they do go to 10 to the negative 3 to the dial settings. So this would be... So this right here, because this is 0.2, I don't know if the camera's picking up the 0.2 well, so that's 0.2, this is 2. If I take this control and bring it all the way down to negative 3, we're 4 decimal places below 1 hertz, so we are at 200 microhertz oscillation on this, and you can get a pretty good throw on the input. So they can run very, very, very slowly, but they're kind of cramped. The other thing that really annoys me when I use this plug-in, your BNC connection goes here. This is your level and offset adjustment. So right here, if you're moving BNCs around, it's very easy to bump this control and knock it out from where you want it. So the front end of these does get kind of cramped, but it's the form factor. There's nothing you can do. I much prefer the push buttons on the meters to the dial knobs on the function generators. Here is one of my more exotic plugins in the lab. This is a programmable calibration generator for tech scopes. This is actually a CG5001. I still have yet to figure out exactly what the top end bandwidth is on this particular plugin, but this is supposed to do all the functions to calibrate things in the lab, but it also gives me a current loop, which will come important later. This is also a future restoration. I have not even looked at this yet, haven't powered it up. The price was right, so I picked it up. However, I do not have the very proprietary and special cable that goes to the front end of this thing to get it to wake up yet. So I have a little bit of time left on that. I'm still digging around for those, but when I get them, I will bring this guy out and we'll see what we can do to get him up and running. This, though, is a 5000 series plug-in. So if I spin this around, you'll see we have a much different card connector layout on the back of this thing than we do on a 500 series board. This is the GPIB connector, actually. So we have power, and then we have even more weird power. So if you tried to plug this in a 500 series frame, you will physically damage this connector for sure, and then maybe short something else out along the way. So very important to only use the 5000 series plugins in the 5000 series frames, but it is safe to use the 500 series plugins in the 5000 series frame. A couple other things, these are microprocessor driven, especially with the GPIB, so they are a lot more complicated to work on and a lot more finicky when they go bad. I also know of specifically the meter in the 5000 series, the TM500 and those types of meters. They have a battery that is near the microprocessor, and if that is not addressed in a timely manner, the electrolyte from the battery will eat the microprocessor actually and destroy the plug-in. I know some people who are looking for microprocessor boards because they did not catch it in time. So the TM5010, unless there is a strong desire to have that specific plug-in, might want to be avoided due to the battery issues with the electrolyte. And from what I understand from some other technicians it is board-ruiningly horrific, that damage. So that's one to take note of. The other one to take note of is and you'll notice I don't have any in my collection, the FC, so the counters in the 500 series frames. They have display issues, and their displays are almost impossible, if not impossible, to find. So that's one that I have personally stayed away from when acquiring some gear. I have the 500 series plugged in, so we'll pull the power on and turn it on. And we have the meters are starting up, but because I don't have this in the high power port, we see we have the error light on. So this is current limited to 400 milliamps. That's fine, it works. It's just, it is what it is. The high power port's over here. The passive cooling on some of these power frames, especially when you pack them full of high power gear, particularly the scope calibration plugins, PG506, TG501, SG503, those types of plugins, they do run very, very warm. That's why I run my calibration plugins in a 5000 series frame for the active cooling. When they were in here, they were starting to get a little overly warm for my taste, but the being packed full of meters, the meters don't dissipate that much power, so they don't warm up too much. But it also shouldn't, this is too close on the top right now. This space is large, so air can get in and out the top, and that's the same thing on the other power frame, because I have two of the exact same with 4 meters each, and they breathe just fine that way. Speaking of feet, I have an updated, I don't know if it's anywhere on the web. I'll post it to Patreon as a free posting if anybody's interested. I have updated feet for the 5000 series module that can be 3D printed. What I did to really shore up, because of my shelving unit and it didn't like the small feet that came with the frame, I made a full rail that goes all the way back. That's in two pieces, but they're 220 millimeters long each, solid fill. They go all the way back, and it really supports the power frames very well. I'm happy with that design, so I will throw that up on Patreon as well. I hope that answers some questions about the purchasing and servicing of the TM5000 and 500 series plugins. These will continue to be a regular fixture on the channel because I do find certain configurations of power frames and plugins very beneficial to have in the lab. And I really do enjoy working with them, along with the quirks that I just mentioned. So if you have any other questions, comments, leave them in the description below, or the comment section below, and I will see everybody in the next video. Bye for now.